Hello everybody, Happy New Year. Hope your 2019 is off to a good start. It's a new year, new beginnings and a new beard, new laptop and new video editing software. So this year's video isn't going to look like last one. I've not been able to do the thing where I show like footage from the movie trailer and narrate over it. This is going to be a bit different. On this year's list, what I'm going to do is I'm going to maybe show a picture of the movie poster and then just do a brief talk about it. When I did the best and worst of list last year, I'd seen 94 movies, which was more than I'd ever seen before. This year I've seen 107. But I don't actually feel like this list is necessarily any more comprehensive than last year. The reason is I didn't think this year was as strong for movies. When I say strong, I mean the good movies this year, they weren't as good as last year's good movies, and the bad movies this year weren't as bad as last year's bad movies. What happens when I watch movies throughout the year is I write reviews of them, which I post on Rotten Tomatoes, and then like on Rotten Tomatoes you rate from half a star up to 5 stars. And what I do is when I post that rating, I put the movie on an Excel spreadsheet and I rank it in a category of either good, bad or mediocre. This year, to give you an example, this year 38 good movies, 26 bad movies and 42 mediocre movies. So while these lists, there could have been a lot more in them, there could have been a lot more substance to them, really, a lot of movies I've seen this year I thought were just okay. I think this year lacked some really defining movies. Don't get me wrong, there were some fantastic movies and some bad ones, but for this year, I think definitely my best of list is a lot stronger than my worst of list. The same rules for this movie list it's just exactly the same rules as last year. Basically, I had to have seen the movie in 2018, and it had to have been a movie that came out in UK cinemas in 2018. Now, obviously that means I can't see every single film that comes out, so what I do now is I've got a very brief list. These are movies I did see this year, like big high-profile movies that didn't make it onto my list, and those are Black Panther, Solo: A Star Wars Story, Venom, Ralph Breaks the Internet, and Bird Box. These movies got a lot of coverage, there was a lot of hype behind them. I liked them all. In fact, Ralph Breaks the Internet was on the list, like the best of list for a while, but it just got pushed off because I've seen, especially towards the end of the year, I've seen a lot of really great films. But the other ones I liked, but for one reason or another, I didn't enjoy them enough to put them on my best of list. So just like last year, we'll start with the worst of list, get that out of the way, and begin with some dishonorable mentions. First of which is Revenge. What I love about the poster for this movie is that right at the top it says superb imaginative filmmaking, which is weird because there's nothing imaginative about this movie at all. This whole film is basically a glossy remake of I Spit on Your Grave. And if you've ever seen that, you'll first think, well, first of all, that was already remade. Second of all, why the hell would you want to remake that movie? It's insanely unoriginal, and it's completely ridiculous as well. The heroine gets sexually assaulted, and in order to cover it up, the main characters push her off a cliff. She falls a ridiculous height and is impaled back first on a dead tree, and after that she pushes herself off, patches herself up, and then takes her revenge. But seriously, she landed back first on a dead tree. I'm like, shouldn't she be at the very least paralyzed? But she should have been dead, and she's also out in the desert for 2+ days with no water. So yeah, the movie's not fun at all. It's really, really stupid, and it's completely unrealistic. The Nutcracker and the Four Realms. This is the first big screen adaptation I've ever seen of The Nutcracker, so I can't really compare it to any of the other ones, but this movie is just a total mess. The plot makes absolutely no sense at all. Character motivations change on a dime. There's a lot of really, really bad comedy, and it just wastes a lot of really talented performers like Keira Knightley, Richard E. Grant. He's covered in this ridiculous makeup, which almost makes it look like he was trying to hide the fact he was even in the film, which I don't blame him for, but overall, the film is just soulless. There's nothing exciting. There's a few good scenes, and it looks fantastic. The dancing is really nice, but overall, it just feels empty. I Feel Pretty. Honestly, I'm really not a massive Amy Schumer fan. Her brand of sort of big, in-your-face comedy doesn't really work in this movie at all. Like, the message is good about how you shouldn't judge people by the looks. It's what's on the inside that counts. That's great, but first of all, that message has been done to death. Second of all, the movie just really, really bungles its delivery of it. It's just constantly hitting you in the face. just pounding you over the head with it. It's not subtle, it's not clever, and the third act is just terrible. It's really, really over sentimental, predictable Hollywood schmaltz. So it gets towards the third act. You can just guess. You can call every single thing that's going to happen. The movie's that predictable, so it's just not fun to watch. A Wrinkle in Time. This is a movie that should have been fantastic because it had so much going for it. It had a fantastically diverse cast. It had a $100 million+ budget. It had some great CGI. It was based on a book that's very popular apparently, but on screen everything falls apart. The story feels like it was made up as they went along. There's massive plot holes. That at one point they go to this guy, Zach Galifianakis' character, to ask him where they're supposed to go. You think that would have been the first place they went, but it's not. They go to a bunch of other places first. It's a shame that it did so poorly because I think this movie, it had a lot going for it. It just didn't work on screen. The best way I can sum this movie up is, and this is what someone said about when Matrix Revolutions came out, A Wrinkle in Time is basically a 109-minute trailer for a movie we never get to see. That's the best way I can sum it up. A lot of potential, just ultimately didn't deliver. Winchester. Just like with A Wrinkle in Time, this is another movie that should have been fascinating. It's based on a fascinating premise about the Winchester widow who's haunted by the spirits of the people killed by the guns that her husband's company made. I mean, that should have been brilliant, but at the end of the day, this was just another really typical horror movie. I mean, it completely wasted Helen Mirren. It's just a film with banging doors, lights flicking on and off, people popping out of corridors when you're supposed to think they're the bad guy. It's just really, really lame, and the rules of the spirits is really inconsistent. Like, they can terrorize this whole building, they can smash everything to pieces, they can throw people across the room, but if you put them inside a room, close the door, and hammer a plank of wood across the door, they can't get out. So I'm not sure why we're supposed to be afraid of these demons, but yeah, really, really bad movie, really dull, and really, really stupid. Okay, that's the dishonourable mentions out of the way, so now let's get on to the actual list, beginning with... Number 10, Mary Magdalene. A contender, definitely, for the most boring movie of the year. I really loved the look of this movie. I love the aesthetic, I love the camera work. It made the desert just look absolutely fantastic, but this film is basically a group of people wandering about aimlessly, not doing really anything at all. Joaquin Phoenix plays Jesus, who delivers a lot of not very good sermons, looking bored the entire time, just like I was. And Mary Magdalene, played by Rooney Mara, despite the fact that she's the title character, I really never felt the impact she made on the story. Seriously, I reckon you could have cut her out completely and you really wouldn't have lost anything. I was watching this with my girlfriend, Rachel, and I said to her at one point, you know what would have been really interesting if the movie had been about Judas Iscariot, and you could have done, like, you know, the build-up to the betrayal and his conflicted feelings building up to it, the actual betrayal, and how guilty he felt afterwards. That would have been really interesting. But doing a movie on Mary Magdalene and having her do really nothing other than just follow Jesus around and kind of look adoringly at him, the whole film was pointless. It felt hollow and empty, and at the end of it, I'm like, what had I really learned? I hadn't learned anything new, so for me, this movie was just a gigantic waste of time. Number 9, The Escape. The Escape is one of those movies that's so unbelievably forgettable. I actually had to go back and read my review I wrote just to remember what the hell happened in it. It's a profoundly uninteresting story. The two lead characters have marital troubles. She disappears, hence the title. And then, like in a Terrence Malick movie, she goes to, I think it's Paris she goes to. She just wanders about, staring at things, not doing very much. And yeah, honestly, I can't think of much to say about this movie because, like I say, it was so forgettable. It was empty. It's one of those movies that, because nothing's happening, it acts like it's really profound and meaningful when really just nothing is happening. So it's dull, it's pointless, and I hated it. Number 8, The Titan. I put the film Geostorm on my list last year. It was one of the most ridiculous sci-fi movies I've ever seen. On this year's list, numbers 8 and 7 are ridiculous sci-fi movies. In The Titan, it's another one of those stories of stupid human beings destroying the world. We've got like 30 years left before the world's completely uninhabitable, so you might be wondering where we're going next. Apparently it's not the moon or even Mars. We're actually going to a satellite of Saturn, which seems a bit far out, but whatever. The film itself, Sam Worthington forced evolution into some creature that can survive on this Saturn moon. Like, the whole thing makes no sense. As someone who's, you know, a big fan and who's really into science, I just couldn't. This movie has so many head-scratching moments. It's a film about evolution made by people who clearly don't know what it is, or just basically don't understand how it works. It's just totally nonsensical. Like I say, the science is all over the place. None of the characters are really likable. Lots of really weird, stupid stuff happens. And on top of that, it's just really dull.
Number 7, The Gateway.
Well, say what you want about The Titan, and I just did, but at least that movie looked like it had a budget. The Gateway is one of the cheapest looking sci-fi movies I've ever seen. It's a story about traveling between parallel dimensions, and first of all, it makes that process look way too simple. Second of all, the production is so bottom shelf, it looks like the traveling between dimension scenes were just filmed in the producer's garage with whatever scrap they could cobble together. It's one of those stories about, you know, you travel, it's like a sort of travel between time and changing events, and the main character's motivation, while it kind of makes sense, it's like it's not really thought through at all, and the movie just turns into like a sort of sub-Terminator film. It's really hard to explain. The biggest shock for me was the fact it has an open ending, like trying to bait a sequel, but because so few people saw this movie, I'm pretty sure that's not going to happen.
Number 6, The Nun.
I recently started watching the Conjuring series a couple of months ago, and I really enjoyed it, especially the first movie. I'm a big fan of paranormal events, you know, when he talks about ghosts and hauntings. I think it's fascinating stuff. And the presence of Valak the Nun has been built up really well since the series started. But now that Valak has her own movie, we shouldn't have been holding our breath. This movie is a massive disappointment. What could have been an interesting origin story turns out to be just another typical horror movie. Like I said, with Winchester, jump scares, flickering lights, a whole lot of stupid, ridiculous character motivations and plot developments. And this film is so lazy. I counted at least 4 occasions where, you know, in a horror movie where someone's on their own and it's all dark and they don't know who's around them, and then suddenly a hand appears on the back of the head or on their shoulder. I counted at least 4 instances when that happened in this movie. The film is that lazy. The start of it's not actually that bad, but the last 40 minutes, it's just a mess. You can tell the filmmakers had no idea what the hell they were doing or how to round this movie up. So, yeah, if you want to watch a good movie in the series, watch the first Conjuring. Don't watch this. It's rubbish.
Number 5, The Lost Viking.
This movie didn't actually start off so bad. It was kind of interesting seeing like a different take on the Viking invasion. But the film quickly runs out of steam and it runs out of story. The main character gets captured and taken into what looks like really low-grade gladiatorial combat. And the movie just never really picks up after that, and then it just ends. The whole thing just feels meaningless. And you know when you watch those, the way the fighting looks in this movie, the battle scenes, you know when you watch those historical documentaries about the likes of like the Battle of Hastings or the Norman invasion or the Viking invasion, when they get a bunch of amateur actors to do like sword play, and it's obvious none of them know how to use a sword, and there's barely any of them, so it has to be directed to make it look like a huge battle's taking place. That's what the battle scenes look like in this. They look cheap, they look amateurish, they look like they were done just first thing in the morning by people who are just roused from sleep. I don't remember anything else about it, honestly. This was another one of the most forgettable films of the year for me.
Number 4, The Cured.
The biggest sin that The Cured commits is that while it's a very routine, mundane story, it thinks it's very socially profound. It's a story of discrimination, and you know we've heard lots of those stories before, and having zombies in the mix doesn't really make any difference. The whole idea is that discrimination is bad. That's its whole message. The problem with the message is the guy who's delivering this message is portrayed as the bad guy, but he's on the good guy's side. So he's the bad guy who's delivering the good message on the good guy's side. It's really confusing. On top of that, it tries to portray itself as a zombie movie that has dramatic elements, but it's not. It's just actually a drama movie that happens to have zombies in it. It's not even a good drama movie, and it doesn't even have good zombies. it's just really slow, it's really pointless, and it doesn't even have a proper conclusion. It's one of those, those movies where they don't end, they just stop, as if they just ran out of ideas. That's what The Cured is. It has no ideas. Okay, before we go into the top three, there's something I need to point out. When I did last year's list, I had a very clear top three and a very clear number one. The Emoji Movie was definitely the worst movie I've seen last year. This year, I have a very clear top three, but not a clear top one. Either of these next three movies could have gone at number one. They're bad. They're all bad, but they're bad for different reasons. And this list, it's in by no way definitive. That's why I was kind of bothered about doing this worst of list, because I didn't have a definitive number one. I've got a definitive number one best movie, but not a definitive number one worst movie. So these movies were the worst films I've seen this last year, but none of them is the clear number one. You can, I guess, sort of decide for yourself, but each of these movies was bad for different reasons, but I wasn't sure exactly which one to put at number one. But I'm just going to roll with how I've got them written down. So these are the top three worst movies I've seen this year. First of all is...
Number 3, The Happy Time Murders.
Well, out of the top three movies on this list, this would be, I'd say, the most annoying. This was a painful experience. This movie attracted so much hatred, I almost felt I felt obligated to watch it. I had to get around to seeing it. It's full of jokes that are more crude than they are funny. There's a scene of one of the Muppets ejaculating for about 30 seconds. It's like Adam Sandler directing a Muppets movie. The fact that it's Muppets in it makes absolutely no difference. It's like, just like The Cured, it tries to have messages about discrimination, but those get completely lost in the haphazard story that makes not much sense, a twist that's totally uninteresting. None of the characters are likable. Melissa McCarthy, she can be really funny, but she's just wasted here. A lot of the scenes feel like the actors were given free range to ad-lib, but with no structure. So they're just flailing, making really, really painfully stupid, unfunny jokes. It's a real low point for everybody who's involved with it. It's really sad to see the Muppets reduced to this. It's just an utter abomination. I hated this movie. This could have been number one, and if this list was the most annoying films, it would be number one.
Number 2, Dark Crimes.
Jim Carrey is an actor that I've really liked in the past. I know his comedic work isn't to everyone's taste, but I really like it, and I really like his dramatic turns as well, especially in the likes of Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. He's brilliant in that. But in this movie, I don't know what the hell was going on. I don't know what the direction was. I don't know what the aim was, but I don't think Jim Carrey knew either. It's a pretty clueless movie. It's set in Poland, but in that magical part of Poland where everybody speaks English, and most people don't have accents either. Jim Carrey, I think he has an accent in this movie. It kind of comes now and then. It's just like very subtle inflections. Even though I think he's supposed to be playing a Polish detective, his accent is it's barely noticeable. The story it starts off kind of interesting, but it gets progressively more and more dull as it goes on. And then it turns out the whole story is just a rip-off of Basic Instinct. So, yeah, I barely remember anything. There's a lot of movies on this list, I keep saying, that I barely remember anything about it. There was a lot of really forgettable movies this year. But the fact this one just dragged on and on and on and then ended on nothing, you hope things are going to get better, but they don't. And then the film just ends. So I'd like to see Carrey return to more comedic work, more dramatic work, but not stuff like this. This is completely beneath him.
And number 1, The Hurricane Heist.
Well, if The Happy Time Murders was the most annoying film of the year, Dark Crimes was the most incoherent, then The Hurricane Heist was the most ridiculous. It's a galactically stupid film. I really can't think of any better way to put it than that. Just directed by Rob Cohen, who in the process of this movie rips off, and I've got the list here, he rips off Perfect Storm, Twister, 2012, Day After Tomorrow, and The Fast and the Furious, which is a movie he directed, so he manages to rip himself off. Don't know how he manages that, but the film is just embarrassing to watch. The CGI is awful, the plot is awful, the acting is dreadful, the screenplay is just completely stupid, and the climax is 3 articulated lorries outrunning a massive hurricane. Everything else is getting sucked up into it, even things next to them, but they're totally fine because the main characters are in them. So I hated this film. I don't know if I necessarily hated it more than the last two. Like I said, this number one position wasn't definitive, but I think I was most embarrassed for watching this movie thinking it's 2018 and people are still making movies this cheap looking and this uninteresting. So is it number one? I don't know, but that top three, those films were hard to sit through. Okay, so those are my 15 worst movies of the year. There's some real stinkers in there. But now I'm looking forward to doing my 15 best movies of the year list. And last year, I know I put them both together in one video, but to prevent things from running too long, I'm going to split them up into two videos. So those were the 15 worst, and in a few days' time, I'll bring you the 15 best. So thank you for watching this video, everybody, and I'll see you soon.